Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Charles. Today we have our last story for this week of Ourson. In this episode, we're going to meet Violette, and we're also going to really meet Ourson and get to know him a bit. This is Violette. Ourson, at 8 years of age, was tall and strong, with magnificent eyes and a sweet voice. His bristles were no longer stiff, but his hair was as soft as silk, and those who loved him could embrace him without being scratched, as Passerose had been the day of his birth. Ourson loved his mother tenderly, and Passerose almost as well, but he was often alone and very sad. He saw too well the horror he inspired, and he saw also that he was unlike other children. One day he was walking along a beautiful road which bordered on the farm. He had walked a long time, and overcome with heat and fatigue, he looked about him for some fresh and quiet spot for repose, when he thought he saw a little object, fair and rosy, a few steps from him. Drawing near with precaution, he saw a little girl asleep. She seemed to be about 3 years old, and she was beautiful as the Loves and Graces. Her blonde hair partly covered her fair and dimpled shoulders, while her soft cheeks were round and fresh and dimpled, with a half-smile played upon her rosy and parted lips, through which small teeth, white and even as pearls, could be seen. Her charming head was reposing upon a lovely rounded arm, and the little hand was beautifully formed and white as snow. The attitude of this little girl was so graceful, so enchanting, that Ourson stood before her immovable with admiration. He watched with as much surprise as pleasure this child sleeping as soundly and peacefully in the wood as if she had been at home in her own little bed. Ourson looked at her a long time and examined her toilette, which was more rich and elegant than anything he had ever seen. Her dress was of white silk embroidered in gold. Her boots were of blue satin, also embroidered in gold. Her stockings were silk and fine as a spider's web. Magnificent bracelets were sparkling upon her arms, and the clasp seemed to contain her portrait. A string of beautiful pearls encircled her throat. A lark now commenced its song just above the lovely little girl, and awakened her from her profound slumber. She looked about her, called her nurse, but finding herself alone in the woods, began to weep bitterly. Ourson was much affected at her tears, and his embarrassment was very great. "If I show myself," he said to himself, "this poor little one will take me for some wild beast of the forest. If she sees me, she will be terrified. She will take to flight and wander still further from her home. If I leave her here, she will die of terror and hunger. What shall I do?" Whilst Ourson reflected thus, the little girl turned around, saw him, uttered a cry of alarm, tried to flee, and fell back in a panic. "Do not fly from me, my dear little one," said Ourson, in his sad, soft voice. "I would not injure you for the whole world. On the contrary, I will assist you to find your father and mother." The child gazed at him with staring eyes and seemed much alarmed. "Speak to me, my little one," said Ourson. "I am not a bear, as you might suppose, but a poor and most unfortunate little boy who inspires everyone with terror and whom everybody avoids." The sweet child's eyes became calmer and softer. Her fear seemed melting away, and she looked undecided. Ourson took one step toward her, but she became greatly frightened, uttered a sharp cry, and tried to rise and run off. Ourson paused and began to weep bitterly. "Unfortunate wretch that I am," he said. "I cannot even assist this poor child. My appearance fills her with terror. She would rather be lost than have help from me." So saying, Ourson covered his face with his hands, and sobbing piteously threw himself on the ground. A few moments afterward, he felt a little hand seeking to take possession of his own. He raised his head and saw the child standing before him, her eyes filled with tears. She caressed and patted the hairy cheeks of poor Ourson. "Don't cry, little cub, don't cry," said she. "Violette is no longer afraid. She will not run away again. Violette will love poor little cub. Won't little cub give his hand to Violette? And if you cry again, Violette will embrace you, poor little cub." Tears of happiness and tenderness succeeded those of despair in our son. Violette, seeing that he was again weeping, approached her soft rosy lips to our son's hairy cheek and gave him several kisses. "You see, little cub, that Violet is no longer afraid. Violet kisses you. Little cub won't eat Violet. She will follow you." If our son had followed the dictates of his heart, he would have pressed her to his bosom and covered with kisses the good and charming child who overcame her natural terror in order to assuage the grief and mortification of a poor being whom she saw unfortunate and miserable. But he feared to arouse her terrors. "She would think that I was about to devour her," he said. He contented himself, therefore, with clasping her hands softly and kissing them delicately. Violette permitted this smilingly. "Now, little cub is satisfied. Little cub will love Violet, poor Violet who is lost." Our son understood well that her name was Violette, but he could not comprehend how this little girl, so richly clad, was left alone in the forest. "Where do you live, my dear little Violette?" "Yonder, yonder, with Papa and Mamma." "What is the name of your Papa?" "He is the king, and dear Mamma is the queen." Our son was more and more surprised, and asked, "Why are you alone in this forest?" "Violet doesn't know. Poor Violet rode on a big dog. He ran, oh, fast, so fast, so fast, a long time. Violet was so tired she fell down and slept." "And the dog, where is he?" Violet turned in every direction and called softly, "Ami, Ami." No dog appeared. "Alas, Ami has gone. Poor Violet is alone, alone." Our son took Violet's hand, and she did not withdraw it, but smiled sweetly. "Shall I go and seek Mamma, Violet?" "No, no. Violet cannot stay all alone in this wood. Violet will go." "Come, then, with me, dear little girl. I will take you to my mother." Our son and Violet now turned their steps towards the farm. Our son gathered strawberries and cherries for Violet, who would not touch them till our son had eaten half. When she found that he still held his half in his hand, she took them and placed them herself in his mouth, saying, "Eat, little cub, eat. Violet will not eat unless you eat. Violet cannot have little cub unhappy. Violet will not see you weep." She looked at him to see if he was content and happy. Our son was really happy. He saw that his good and pretty little companion not only tolerated him, but was interested in him, and sought to make herself agreeable. His eyes were sparkling with joy. His voice, always soft and sad, was now tender. After half an hour's walk, he said to her, "Violet, you are no longer afraid of poor Ourson, are you?" "Oh, no, no, no," exclaimed she. "Our son is good. Violet will not leave him." "You are willing, then, that I shall embrace you? You are no longer afraid of me?" Violet, without further reply, threw herself in his arms. Our son embraced her tenderly and pressed her to his heart. "Dear Violet, I will always love you. I will never forget that you are the only child who was ever willing to speak to me, touch me, or embrace me." A short time after they arrived at the farm. Agnella and Passerose were seated at the door talking together. When they saw our son arrive holding a little girl richly dressed by the hand, they were so surprised that neither could utter a word. "Dear Mamma, here is a good and charming little girl whom I found sleeping in the forest. She is called Violette. She is very well bred, and is not afraid of me. She even embraced me when she saw me weeping." "And why did you weep, my poor boy?" said Agnella. "Because the little girl was afraid of me," said our son in a sad and trembling voice, "and hurt herself when trying to run away from me." "Violet is not afraid now," she said, interrupting him hastily. "Violet had given her hand to poor Ourson, embraced him, and fed him with cherries and strawberries." "But what is this all about?" said Passerose. "Why has our son the charge of this little girl? Why was she all alone in the wood? Who is she? Answer, our son. I do not understand this." "I know nothing more than yourself, dear Passerose," said our son. I saw this little child asleep in the wood all alone. She awoke and began to weep. Suddenly, she saw me and cried out in terror. I spoke to her and began to approach her, but she screamed again with fright. I was sorrowful, oh, so very sorrowful. I wept bitterly. Hush, hush, poor Ourson, exclaimed Violet, putting her little hand on his mouth. Violet will certainly never make you cry again. While saying these words, Violet's voice was trembling, and her sweet eyes were full of tears. Good little girl, said Agnella, embracing her. You love our poor Ourson, who is so unhappy. Oh, yes. Violet loves Ourson, will always love Ourson. Agnella and Passerose asked Violet many questions about her father, mother, and country, but they could learn nothing more from her than she had already told Ourson. Her father was a king, her mother a queen, and she did not know how she came to be alone in the forest. Agnella did not hesitate to take under her protection this poor lost child. She loved her already because of the affection the little one seemed to entertain for Ourson, and because of the happiness Ourson's whole manner expressed on seeing himself loved by someone other than his mother and Passerose. It was now the hour for supper. Passerose laid the cloth, and they all took their seats at the table. Violet asked to be put at Ourson's side. She was gay and laughed and talked merrily. Ourson was more happy than he had ever been. Agnella was contented, and Passerose jumped for joy on seeing a little playmate for her dear Ourson. In her transports, she spilled a can of cream, which was not lost, however, as a cat came and licked it up to the last drop. After supper, Violet fell asleep in her chair. Where shall we lay her? Said Agnella. I have no bed for her. Give her mine, dear mamma, said Ourson. I can sleep quite as well in the stable. Agnella and Passerose at first refused, but Ourson insisted so much upon being allowed to make this little sacrifice that they at last consented. Passerose carried Violet still sleeping in her arms, undressed her without awakening her, and laid her quietly in Ourson's bed, near that of Agnella. Ourson went to sleep in the stable on the bundles of hay. He slept peacefully, with content in his heart. Passerose rejoined Agnella in the parlour. She found her meditating, with her head resting on her hand. Of what are you thinking, dear queen? Said she. Your eyes are sad, your lips do not smile. I am come to show you the bracelets of the little stranger. This medallion ought to open, but I have tried in vain to open it. Perhaps we shall find here a portrait or a name. Give it to me, my child. These bracelets are beautiful. They may aid us, perhaps, in finding a resemblance which presents itself vaguely to my remembrance, and which I am trying in vain to make clear. Agnella took the bracelets and turned them from side to side and pressed them in every way, trying to open the medallion, but she succeeded no better than Passerose had done. At the moment when, weary of her vain efforts, she returned them to Passerose, she saw in the middle of the room a woman, glittering as the sun. Her face was of dazzling whiteness. Her hair seemed made of threads of gold, and a crown of glittering stars adorned her brow. Her waist was small, and her person seemed transparent. It was so delicate and luminous her floating robe was studded with stars like those which formed her crown. Her glance was soft, yet she smiled maliciously, but still with goodness. Madame, said she to Agnella, you see in me the fairy Drolette, the protectress of your son and the little princess whom he brought home this morning from the forest. This princess is nearly related to you, for she is your niece, the daughter of your brother-in-law Indolent and sister-in-law Nonchalant. Your husband succeeded after your flight in killing Indolent and Nonchalant, who did not distrust him, and who passed all their time in sleeping, eating, and lounging. Unfortunately, I could not prevent this crime, as I was absent assisting at the birth of a prince whose parents are under my protection, and I forgot myself while playing tricks upon a wicked old maid of honor and an old chamberlain who is cruel and avaricious, both of them friends of my sister, the Fairy Furious. But I arrived in time to save the Princess Violette, only daughter and heiress of King Indolent and Queen Nonchalant. She was playing in the garden while the King Ferocious was seeking her with his poignard in his hand. I induced her to mount on the back of my dog Ami, who was ordered to leave her in the forest, and to that point I directed the steps of the prince, your son. Conceal from both of them their birth and your own, and do not allow Violette to see these bracelets which contain portraits of her father and mother, nor the rich clothing which I have replaced by articles better suited to the quiet existence she will lead here. I have here, said the fairy, a casket of precious stones. It contains the happiness of Violette, but you must hide them from all eyes and not open the casket until she shall have been lost and found. I will execute your orders most faithfully, madam, but I pray you tell me if my unhappy son must long wear his frightful covering. Patience, patience, cried the fairy. I watch over you, over Violette, and over your son. Inform our son of the faculty he has in exchanging his skin with anyone who loves him well enough to make this sacrifice for his sake. Remember that no one must know the rank of our son or of Violette. Passerose, on account of devotion, deserves to be the only one initiated into this mystery, and she can always be trusted. Adieu, Queen. Count always upon my protection. Here is a ring which you must place upon your little finger. As long as you wear it there, you will want for nothing. Waving her farewell with her hand, the fairy took the form of a lark and flew away singing merrily. Agnella and Passerose looked at each other. Agnella sighed, and Passerose smiled. Let us hide this precious casket, dear Queen, and the clothing of Violette. I am going now to see what the fairy has prepared for Violette's dress tomorrow morning. She ran quickly and opened the wardrobe and found it filled with clothing, linen, and hosiery, all plain but good and comfortable. After having looked at all, counted all, and approved all, and after having assisted Agnella to undress, Passerose went to bed, and was soon sound asleep. And that is the story of Violette. And here we finally really meet our son and get to know him a bit, and we are introduced to Violette. And once again, Countess de Ségur has a relationship being formed between relatives, in this case, cousins. And we learn about the passing of Violette's parents and the horrors of the king. Honestly, my favorite part of the story so far is the end of this particular tale, where you have the fairy Drolette imploring Agnella to trust her, just to trust her, despite the fact that the reason that Violette's parents are dead is because she got too caught up in another task and allowed them to perish. It's not really feeling the trust there, but we shall see, we shall see. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Next week, we will pick back up with the tale of our son for at least one more week's worth. Perhaps then we'll take a break, or perhaps we won't. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Let me know. Send me a note via the website or Twitter or anywhere you'd like to. And let me know if you'd like me to continue the story of our son until its conclusion. As always, thank you so much for listening.